A wedding day is supposed to be a woman's crowning moment. But when a cruel groom decided to publicly humiliate his plus-size bride by tearing her dress at the altar, he didn't realize exactly who was watching. The cathedral doors blew open, and the city's most feared mafia boss stepped in to claim her. Beatrice Gallagher had always been the big girl. In the glittering, ruthless high society of Manhattan, where a woman's worth was often weighed on a bathroom scale, Beatrice stood out. She was fat, undeniably so, with lush, heavy curves, a soft waist, and a fullness that the cruel whispers of her peers never let her forget. She was also the sole heiress to her father's multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate, Gallagher Innovations. For most of her 28 years, Beatrice navigated a world of fake smiles, shielding her gentle heart from the gold diggers and the mockers. Then came Dominic Rossi. Dominic was the kind of man who looked like he had stepped off the cover of a luxury watch catalogue. He was a rising star in the city's real estate market, possessing sharp cheekbones, perfectly styled dark hair, and a smile that could disarm a vault. When he first approached Beatrice at a charity gala, she had assumed he was looking for a donation. Instead, he asked her to dance. Over the next 14 months, Dominic showered her with an affection she had never known. He told her she was beautiful, that her curves were a masterpiece, and that he loved her mind, her laugh, and her soul. For a woman who had spent her life feeling invisible, Dominic's attention was an intoxicating drug. She fell, and she fell hard. The morning of the wedding was a chaotic symphony of hairspray, popping champagne corks, and nervous laughter in the bridal suite of the Plaza Hotel. Beatrice stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, her hands trembling as she touched the delicate lace of her custom couture gown. It had taken a small army of seamstresses to construct it, reinforcing the corset to support her heavy bust and draping the silk chiffon to flatter her wide hips. She felt beautiful. For the first time in her life, she truly felt like a princess. "You look breathtaking, Bee," whispered her maid of honor, Chloe. Chloe was a petite, striking blonde who had been Beatrice's friend since college. Beatrice smiled warmly at her, oblivious to the cold, calculating glint in Chloe's eyes. "I'm just so nervous," Beatrice admitted, her hands smoothing the expansive skirt of her dress. "It feels like a dream. Someone like Dominic, choosing me. It still doesn't feel real." "Oh, it's very real, honey," Chloe said, turning away to hide a smirk as she adjusted a floral arrangement. "Today is going to be a day you will never forget." Downstairs, the grand ballroom had been transformed into a floral wonderland. Thousands of white orchids and hydrangeas dripped from the chandeliers. 500 of New York's elite were seated in the gilded chairs, murmuring among themselves. The Gallagher family sat on the left, beaming with pride, while the Rossi side sat on the right, their expressions tight and unreadable. As the first majestic chords of the string quartet echoed through the cavernous hall, the heavy oak doors swung open. Beatrice, clutching her father Arthur's arm, stepped into the aisle. The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. She gripped her bouquet of white peonies so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You ready, my beautiful girl?" Arthur whispered, patting her hand. "I am, Dad," she replied, her eyes locked on the end of the aisle. Dominic stood at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo. But as Beatrice drew closer, her heart gave a strange, uneasy flutter. The loving, adoring smile he usually wore for her was completely absent. Instead, his jaw was set, his arms were crossed, and a chillingly smug expression rested on his face. He wasn't looking at her like a man looking at his future wife. He was looking at her like a predator, looking at a trapped animal. She brushed off the feeling, chalking it up to pre-wedding jitters. As her father handed her off to Dominic, Arthur leaned in and whispered, "Take care of my girl, Rossi." "Oh, I'll give her exactly what she deserves," Dominic replied smoothly. The phrasing was odd, cold, but before Arthur could process it, the ceremony began. The officiant, a highly respected bishop, smiled warmly at the couple. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Beatrice and Dominic." Beatrice stood there, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked out at the front row. Chloe was seated there, but she wasn't crying tears of joy. She held her smartphone up, the little red light blinking. She was recording. Beside her, Dominic's groomsmen, men who had always been distantly polite to Beatrice, were snickering, nudging each other like frat boys, waiting for the punchline of a cruel joke. The bishop reached the pivotal moment of the ceremony. "Dominic Rossi, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Silence fell over the ballroom. The seconds stretched out, thick and suffocating. Beatrice looked up at Dominic, her warm brown eyes pleading silently for him to speak. Dominic slowly turned his head to face the crowd. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wireless microphone. He flicked it on. A sharp burst of feedback pierced the air, causing the guests to wince. "Do I take her?" Dominic's voice boomed through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh that sent ice water through Beatrice's veins. "Are you kidding me?" Gasps erupted from the pews. Beatrice's father half stood from his seat, his face flushing dark red. "Dominic, what are you doing?" Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. She reached a hand out to touch his arm, but he swatted it away with a look of pure disgust. "Don't touch me," he sneered into the microphone, his eyes sweeping over her large frame with utter revulsion. He turned his attention back to the crowd. "For 14 months, I have played the part. I have held her hand. I have taken her to dinner. I have pretended that I wasn't physically nauseated every time I had to put my arms around all this." He gestured dismissively at Beatrice's body. Tears instantly welled in Beatrice's eyes, spilling over her carefully applied makeup. She couldn't breathe. The corset of her dress suddenly felt like an iron maiden, crushing her ribs. "You see," Dominic continued, pacing the altar like a showman, "Gallagher Innovations is acquiring my real estate firm next week. Arthur here wouldn't give me the time of day, but I knew his weak spot, his pathetic, desperate, fat daughter. I knew if I made her fall in love with me, the old man would hand me the keys to the kingdom." "You son of a bitch!" Arthur roared, storming out of his pew. Two of Dominic's burly groomsmen immediately intercepted the older man, shoving him back forcefully. "But I realized something this morning," Dominic said, his voice dripping with venom. "Even $1 billion isn't enough to make me wake up next to a beached whale for the rest of my life. The bet is off." The word hit Beatrice like a physical blow. A bet. The entire relationship. The tender kisses. The whispered promises in the dark. It was all a transaction. A joke. And now, the punchline was being delivered in front of 500 people. "Please, Dominic," Beatrice sobbed, the humiliation completely breaking her. She took a step backward, just wanting to escape, to run out of the ballroom and disappear into the streets of Manhattan. "Stop! I'm not done," Dominic snarled. As Beatrice turned to flee, blindly grabbing handfuls of her heavy skirt, Dominic's foot shot out. He planted his polished leather dress shoe firmly on the delicate, sweeping lace train of her dress. Beatrice lunged forward to run. The physics of the moment were brutal and instantaneous. With Dominic pinning the heavy fabric down, the force of Beatrice's momentum pulled violently against the bodice. The sound of tearing silk and reinforced boning echoed through the silent, horrified room. The custom bodice, holding the heavy weight of the skirt and supporting Beatrice's large frame, gave way completely. The dress split violently down the back and tore across the waistline. The heavy skirt pulled down, ripping the front of the gown wide open, exposing Beatrice's torso, her supportive shapewear, and her bare skin to the freezing air of the ballroom. She shrieked, dropping her bouquet as she desperately tried to pull the shredded, heavy fabric back up to cover her exposed, shaking body. But the dress was ruined, hanging off her in tattered, useless ribbons. Laughter erupted from the front row. Chloe, her supposed best friend, was howling with laughter, her phone still recording every agonizing second of Beatrice's exposure. Dominic stood over Beatrice, looking down at her, clutching her ruined dress, and smirked. "Look at yourself," he spat. "You're a joke, Beatrice. You always have been." Beatrice fell to her knees, burying her face in her hands, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. The humiliation was absolute. She was exposed, devastated, and completely broken. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, some horrified, some cruel. Her father was screaming at the groomsmen, trying to reach her. Then the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A deafening, explosive crash echoed from the back of the ballroom. The heavy gold-leafed doors didn't just open. They were violently kicked inward, slamming against the walls with a force that rattled the chandeliers. The laughter died instantly. 500 heads whipped around to the entrance. Standing in the doorway, framed by the light of the hallway, was Lorenzo Moretti. Even in the insulated world of New York high society, the name Lorenzo Moretti commanded absolute terror. He wasn't a socialite. He was the undisputed king of the city's underground. Rumored to control the ports, the illegal syndicates, and a network of enforcers that terrified even the police, Lorenzo was a phantom wrapped in a bespoke Italian suit. He was exceptionally tall, broad-shouldered, with a brutally handsome face marred only by a faint silver scar that ran from his left ear to his jawline. Behind him stood 6 men in dark suits, their hands resting ominously inside their jackets. They fanned out silently, locking the ballroom doors behind them and taking positions at every exit. Nobody was leaving. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of prey, realizing a predator had entered the cage. Lorenzo's dark, obsidian eyes scanned the room. They bypassed the terrified guests, ignored the spluttering bishop, and locked onto the altar. They saw Dominic, standing arrogantly. And then they dropped to the floor, resting on the weeping, shivering, half-naked figure of Beatrice Gallagher. A muscle feathered in Lorenzo's jaw. The air around him seemed to crackle with a sudden, terrifying violence. Up at the altar, all the blood drained from Dominic's face. He dropped the microphone, which hit the floor with a loud, electronic screech. Dominic took a step back, his arrogance evaporating into pure, unadulterated panic. Because what the high society crowd didn't know, what Beatrice didn't know, was that Dominic Rossi's failing real estate firm wasn't just broke. He owed $15 million to the Moretti syndicate, and Lorenzo Moretti had come to collect. Lorenzo began to walk down the aisle. His footsteps were slow, rhythmic, and heavy, echoing like a death knell in the silent room. As he passed the pews, Billionaires and socialites physically shrank back, averting their eyes. When he reached the front row, Chloe, oblivious to the gravity of the situation and still holding her phone up, scoffed. "Excuse me, you're blocking my shot." Lorenzo didn't even look at her. Lorenzo didn't even pull. Without breaking his stride, he snapped his hand out, snatched the smartphone from Chloe's grip, and crushed it in his massive fist. The sound of shattering glass and snapping plastic made Chloe shriek in terror. He dropped the mangled remains of the phone at her feet. He ascended the 3 steps to the altar. Dominic was shaking now, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "Mr. Moretti, Lorenzo, please, I have the money. I just need a few more days. The merger with Gallagher." "Shut your mouth." Lorenzo's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute obedience. He didn't raise his voice, but the menace in it made several people in the front row gasp. Lorenzo stepped past the trembling groom and knelt on the plush carpeting next to Beatrice. She was shaking violently, clutching the ruined remnants of her white silk dress against her chest, her eyes squeezed shut, bracing for more cruelty. Lorenzo moved with surprising gentleness for a man known for his brutality. He shrugged off his custom-tailored suit jacket. He reached out, his large, calloused hands gently pulling Beatrice's trembling arms away from her face, and draped the heavy, warm jacket over her bare shoulders, completely covering her exposed body. Beatrice gasped, her tear-filled brown eyes flying open. She looked up into the dark, intense eyes of the most dangerous man in the city. "You're shaking, mia dolcezza, my sweetness," Lorenzo murmured softly, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. He stood up, offering her his hand. "Come. You are marrying the wrong man." Beatrice stared at the large, calloused hand extended toward her. The masculine scent of cedar wood, expensive tobacco, and a faint metallic hint of gunpowder washed over her, replacing the stifling floral perfume of the ruined wedding. Her breath hitched. The man kneeling before her wasn't a savior from a fairy tale. He was a notorious nightmare. Yet, as she looked into Lorenzo Moretti's dark, commanding eyes, she saw no pity. She saw absolute, burning reverence. Slowly, her trembling, plump fingers reached out. The moment her skin met his, Lorenzo's grip was firm, anchoring her to reality. He stood, pulling her up with him effortlessly, keeping her safely tucked inside the oversized warmth of his suit jacket. "Moretti, listen to me," Dominic shrieked, his voice cracking in a high-pitched squeal that shattered any remaining illusion of his suave persona. "You want the money? Take the Gallagher accounts. Take the old man for everything he has. Just don't hurt me over this fat cow." The air in the cathedral seemed to turn to solid ice. Lorenzo didn't yell. He didn't even draw a weapon. He simply turned his head. With blinding, terrifying speed, his right fist connected with Dominic's jaw. The sickening crack of bone fracturing echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Dominic flew backward, crashing over a massive display of white hydrangeas, landing in a pathetic, groaning heap on the marble floor. Blood instantly pooled on his pristine white collar. A collective gasp swept through the pews, but no one moved. In the third row, District Attorney Jonathan Reynolds, a man who had campaigned on a strict anti-mob platform, was staring fiercely at his own shoes, suddenly entirely unwilling to intervene. Lorenzo pulled a crisp silk handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his knuckles, and let it fall onto Dominic's twitching form. "You misunderstand, Rossi." Lorenzo's voice was a low rumble that carried to every corner of the silent room. "The 15 million you owe my syndicate is pocket change. I didn't interrupt this circus to collect a debt." Lorenzo snapped his fingers. From the back of the church, his lead enforcer, a hulking man named Vincenzo, strode down the aisle. Vincenzo wasn't carrying a gun. He was carrying a thick manila folder. He bypassed Lorenzo and handed it directly to Arthur Gallagher, who was still standing behind the altar, breathing heavily. "Open it, Arthur," Lorenzo commanded respectfully. Arthur's hands shook as he flipped the folder open. As his eyes scanned the glossy 8x10 photographs inside, his face drained of color, then flushed with a terrifying, homicidal rage. "What is this?" Arthur whispered, his voice trembling with fury. "Look closely at the timestamps, Mr. Gallagher," Lorenzo said smoothly, wrapping a protective arm around Beatrice's thick waist, pulling her softly against his solid side. "Those photos were taken over the last 8 months in a penthouse suite at the St. Regis, a suite I happen to own." Beatrice looked over her father's shoulder. The images were clear, explicit, and undeniable. It was Dominic, tangled in the bed sheets with a petite blonde woman. The woman who was laughing in the photos, her face turned perfectly toward the hidden security camera, was Chloe. Beatrice felt the air knock out of her lungs. She slowly turned her head to look at her maid of honor. Chloe had stopped laughing. The phone she had been using to record Beatrice's humiliation was crushed on the floor. And now, Chloe looked like she was about to vomit. "You—" Beatrice's voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the room, it carried. "You helped me pick out my dress. You held my hand when I was nervous." Chloe backed away, her hands raised. Wait, let me explain. He told me he was only using you." "Get her out of my sight," Arthur bellowed, his voice cracking like a whip, "before I kill her myself. The Miller family is finished. Do you hear me, Chloe? Your father's firm, your trust funds, your social standing. I will eradicate your entire bloodline from this city." Vincenzo stepped forward, grabbing the sobbing Chloe by the arm and dragging her unceremoniously down the aisle and out the side doors. The heavy thud of the door sealing shut felt like a final judgment. Beatrice stood paralyzed. The two people she had trusted most in the world had orchestrated her public execution. She looked down at the shredded ruins of her beautiful white dress, poking out from beneath Lorenzo's dark jacket. She felt heavy, unlovable, disgusting. "Hey," a soft, raspy voice commanded. She looked up. Lorenzo's large hand cupped her jaw, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. The sheer intensity in his dark eyes made her heart race. "Do not look down," Lorenzo whispered fiercely, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "Do not let these parasitic cowards make you feel small. You are a queen, Beatrice. You take up space in this world because you were meant to rule it. There is not a single curve on your beautiful body that is not absolute perfection." Beatrice choked on a sob. "You don't even know me." "I know everything about you," Lorenzo corrected, his voice thickening with emotion. 14 months ago, at the Waldorf Astoria charity gala, you wore a midnight blue dress. You were standing by the ice sculpture, laughing at a joke your father made. I was there, meeting with Councilman Bradley in the shadows. I saw you." Beatrice's eyes widened. She remembered that night. It was the night Dominic had asked her to dance. "I wanted to approach you," Lorenzo confessed, his eyes searching hers, entirely ignoring the 500 stunned guests watching them. "But I am a man who lives in the dark, Beatrice. My hands are stained. You are pure light. I told myself to stay away, that you deserved a good man, a legitimate man." He turned his head, shooting a look of pure, concentrated venom at the bleeding, whimpering Dominic on the floor. Then I found out Rossi made his move. I ran a background check on him. I knew about his debts, his failing business, his affair with your bridesmaid. I knew about the bet. "Why didn't you tell me?" Arthur demanded, clutching the photos. "Because a woman like Beatrice, with her heart, would have thought it was a misunderstanding. She had to see who he truly was. I had to let him hang himself." Lorenzo looked back at Beatrice. "I let him expose his true nature so that you would never, for a single second, look back and wonder if you made a mistake." Lorenzo stepped back slightly and turned to the stunned crowd, his imposing figure shielding Beatrice from their stares. "Dominic Rossi's life in New York is over," Lorenzo announced. "His assets are seized by my organization. His name is dust. If any bank, any firm, or any family in this room so much as offers him a cup of coffee, you will answer to me." The silence that followed was absolute. Lorenzo turned his attention to the officiant. Bishop Thomas, a man who regularly dined with the mayor, was trembling so hard his ceremonial robes were shaking. "Bishop," Lorenzo said calmly, "the bride is already at the altar. The guests are seated. The flowers are paid for. I believe we have a wedding to finish." The bishop swallowed hard. "Mr. Moretti, you cannot simply—" Lorenzo tilted his head, the silver scar on his jaw catching the light. "Are you telling me I cannot marry the woman I love?" The word love hit Beatrice like a physical shockwave. He had never spoken to her before today, yet the raw, obsessive truth in his voice was undeniable. He didn't look at her heavy thighs, her wide hips, or her soft stomach with disgust. He looked at her like a starving man looking at a feast. Lorenzo turned to Arthur Gallagher. The tech billionaire was gripping the wooden podium, looking between the terrifying Mafia Boss and his weeping, trembling daughter. "Mr. Gallagher," Lorenzo said, his tone shifting to deep respect, "I am not a gentleman. My world is violent. But I swear to you on my mother's grave, I will burn this city to ash before I let another tear fall from your daughter's eyes. I will worship her. I will protect her. And I will give her the empire she deserves. Give me your blessing." Arthur looked at Lorenzo. He looked at Dominic, bleeding on the floor, the man who had plotted to steal his company and destroy his daughter's soul. Then Arthur looked at Beatrice. He saw the way Lorenzo's jacket enveloped her, keeping her safe. He saw the way the Mafia Boss stood between her and the cruel eyes of the world. Arthur took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and nodded. "Change the name on the certificate, Bishop," Beatrice gasped. "Dad, no, I can't. This is crazy." "Beatrice, look at me," Lorenzo said softly, taking both of her soft, plump hands in his. "You have spent your entire life trying to shrink yourself to fit into a world of small-minded people. I don't want you to shrink. I want you exactly as you are. All of you. Let me prove it." Beatrice looked into his eyes. There was no mockery, no calculation, only a dark, burning devotion that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. For the first time in her life, a man was looking at her body, not past it, not despite it, but at it, and seeing a goddess. "Okay," she whispered, her voice finally steadying. "Okay." The bishop, realizing he had no choice, shakily opened his book. The ceremony was a blur. There were no rehearsed vows, only Lorenzo holding her hands tightly, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. When it came time for the rings, Lorenzo removed a heavy, flawless, 5-carat, emerald-cut diamond ring from his own pinky finger, a legendary family heirloom, and slid it onto Beatrice's finger. It fit perfectly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the bishop stammered. "You may kiss the bride." Lorenzo didn't hesitate. His large hands slid into her hair, tilting her head back. He kissed her not with polite, performative affection, but with a fierce, consuming hunger. Beatrice melted against him, the warmth of his chest seeping through the suit jacket. When he finally pulled away, her lips were swollen, and her cheeks were flushed. "Mrs. Moretti," he whispered against her mouth. Lorenzo scooped her up into his arms effortlessly, despite her weight. Beatrice gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his thick neck as he carried her down the aisle. The guests remained frozen in stunned silence. As they reached the doors, Lorenzo paused and glanced back at his men. "Clean up the trash," he ordered, nodding toward Dominic. As Lorenzo carried Beatrice out into the crisp Manhattan air toward a waiting fleet of black SUVs, the sounds of Dominic screaming as Vincenzo dragged him away echoed through the church halls. 6 months later, the high society of New York had a new, unspoken ruling class. Gallagher Innovations successfully acquired Dominic's old firm for pennies on the dollar, integrating it into a massive new real estate empire quietly backed by Moretti Capital. Dominic Rossi was rumored to be working in a fish processing plant in Alaska, sending every meager paycheck back to New York to pay off an ever-growing interest rate on a debt he could never escape. Chloe Miller's family had been socially and financially exiled, quietly relocating to a rundown suburb in Ohio after their credit lines were mysteriously and permanently frozen by every major bank. But inside the fortified penthouse overlooking Central Park, Beatrice Moretti stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. She wasn't wearing shapewear. She wasn't wearing a corset. She was wearing a sheer silk robe that clung to every soft roll, every heavy curve, and every inch of her plus-size body. Strong, scarred arms wrapped around her waist from behind. Lorenzo pressed a kiss to her bare, plush shoulder, his hands reverently tracing the swell of her hips. "You are breathtaking," Lorenzo murmured, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection. Beatrice smiled, leaning back into the solid warmth of the most dangerous man in the city. She didn't feel invisible anymore. She felt powerful. She felt beautiful. And as she looked at her husband, she knew that the cruelest day of her life had been the greatest blessing in disguise. The groom had ripped her dress to destroy her, but all he did was clear the stage for a king to crown his queen. Wow, what a wild twist of fate. Beatrice's story proves that the trash sometimes takes itself out, and true love doesn't care about a dress size or society's cruel standards. Do you think Lorenzo was right to step in and handle Dominic the way he did? Or did the Mafia Boss go too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this dramatic tale of revenge and romance, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more jaw-dropping, real-life drama stories.